Hey guys, Morten and Henning from Flip Normals here. And in this video, we are looking at part 2 of sculpting an Overwatch styled inspired face. And here we're sort of tweaking the shapes, doing retopology, and also more importantly, I guess, doing some stylized hair.
So everything is coming together. So let's jump into ZBrush.
So here is the finished render from the sculpt that we'll be creating in this 2-part series. And if you want more content like this, make sure to subscribe so you get notified every time we put out a new video. So this first part is purely focused on shape fixing. So the first part of the video, sculpting and doing everything in one session. What I like to do is leave my sculpts, leave my projects for a little bit, then come back to it, with fresh eyes, maybe the next day, the next evening, whatever it is. Because then you have a fresh pair of eyes, you have a fresh mind, you're not tired anymore, and then you're better able to critically evaluate what you've been doing. So I realized there were some proportional things that I wanted to fix, especially to get closer to that stylized and Overwatch-like look. Now keep in mind, what I'm doing right now is basically sacrilegious. I'm only tweaking the profile, ignoring every other angle. And you'll see why this is gonna turn out horrible in a second, but there's some method to the madness.
The worst is when you think you have a really good sculpt, go to bed, wake up next morning and like, oh God.
It happens so often.
The worst.
Oh, there we go.
There you go. Yeah.
High elf from Oblivion.
Yeah.
You see, so the issue here, just to give you some context, the issue here is that because I basically only tried to fix something in one dimension, this was intentional. You fix something in one dimension, which looks okay, then it looks fine from there, but then every other angle hasn't been touched at all, so it's lacking volume everywhere else. It's not a problem as long as you're aware of what you're doing. And we will fix this, don't worry. Oh boy, the eyes.
Yeah, it's getting pretty rough when you're between the stages.
Yeah. And that's where you just gotta, rely on your previous experience of doing more and more sculpts to know that you can get to the final result that you're after.
And if this is one of your first sculpts, you just have to go on an adventure and trust that it's not about the final result, but it's about the journey and the friends you make along the way.
Yeah. One thing that I've done here as well is actually merged the eyes, the brows, the lashes, and the face. This allows you to move everything together. So if you're tweaking the shape of the eyes, that moves the brows and the lashes with it. So if you're doing something like this where it's more stylized and everything is sort of connected this way, I feel like that's a very efficient way to work. Obviously, you will have to go in and fix things. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, it's so frustrating when it goes from one design revisions to another revision and the in-between stages where it looks like absolute crap and you're like, trust me, I know how to do this.
Yeah, because if you remember, we'll take a look at the undo history in a bit again, so to give you a refresher. But it was a different look, right off the bat. We started off with something, like we mentioned, a little more realistic that we would then sort of try to stylize, and then went through some stages of where the character would look one way, and then the start of this chapter where we just completely demolish the profile to tweak it. That just takes it into another dimension. So now we're definitely going for something that is different and is going to be closer to our reference.
I also recommend that you shouldn't be too afraid of destroying your work. I do this a lot where I have some hair and maybe some clothing, eyebrows, eyelashes, and I want to change the overall proportion, but it's a bit scary because then I have to move all those different pieces as well. But you just have to do it. You have to do whatever is best for your project.
Yeah, one of my biggest weaknesses is actually committing to those big changes. It's very easy for me to get lost in the tiny movements of the face, just it's changing the mouth a little bit, the nose a little bit, but making those bolder decisions, especially once you notice that you're not following your reference as closely as you could have and you're not getting to the character that you wanted, it's very important to try and stay critical and not emotionally attached to your work at this point, and then be able to make those changes. And you can see we're still suffering from the profile change. We've added a little bit of volume to the side, just, you know, with the move brush, just moving things out a little bit to give the cheeks more volume, the nose, the mouth a little more volume, but she still has a very pointy, mousy face.
I am wondering how many times you're gonna remake the pupils, the iris in this.
I think it's about 3 times in total. So here we're doing what we talked about in chapter 1. We're bringing all the elements of the front of the face closer together. You know, we're bringing them down towards the lower half of the face in an effort to make it appear younger and a little more cute. And it's always this back and forth, back and forth. You tweak a little bit, you evaluate it, you tweak it some more. Because at this stage, even small changes can actually have a big impact on what it looks like. Does it look good? Is it off? Has the character changed in any way from the changes that you've just done? And trying to strike this balance between part realism, part stylized, because that's sort of how I interpreted Overwatch. It's not something like Henning mentioned in the previous video, something like, it's not anime style, you know, it's not super stylized. There is still room for realistic shapes in there, some more volumetric shapes, especially because of how the shading is in Overwatch as well.
You also have to remember to ask for feedback as you go along with this as well. Like, and we're not just saying this, Morten was asking for feedback along the way.
Yes.
And that's also why there are some design changes actually happening, is because of that feedback would improve the art.
And you can see now, right at this point, now we're actually getting in to the territory where we've kind of figured out the character. From here on out, it's pretty much done. There will be, of course, subtle tweaks to it, but the profile change that we did in the beginning, along with how we've now widened the face, softened some of the, like the nose and the mouth, made it less, like I said, mousy, less pointy. Added that volume has really changed the character into where she sort of like, now she's on the path to becoming the character that we want her to be. One thing that can be tricky, especially when you're working in this kind of Dynamesh kind of workflow, is that everything gets scaled to the same resolution. So a method that I like to use is using the MartinsPRO brush to go in and target specific elements that I want to up-res or down-res. You know, the ears require a lot more resolution because they are just a more complex shape compared to everything else you see. The same thing with the eyes, and in some cases the mouth. The back of the head, the neck, for example, they don't really need that much resolution, so we can always go in with a larger brush there to reduce the detail level.
I love working with MartinsPRO. It's so cool how you can add dynamic resolution in different areas.
I think that was one of those things that they added to ZBrush, where it was like, okay, finally, here's actually like a revolutionary feature that will change the way that I work. Doesn't happen a lot.
Particularly for concepting, it's an actual game changer.
Yeah. And here you can see how that sort of changed the resolution of the ear. And you can always change your brush size just to to res it up even more. Like I said, don't really need detail back here. We're going to be covering that in hair anyway and retopologizing it, so.
Then it's back to going through the history again, just evaluating what's going on.
It's always interesting to see, right? Here we're still in the realistic territory, getting into something more stylized, a little baby-like, almost like Greek statue, and a big change into this high elf territory, messing up the profile, and then finally adding that back in the volumes to balance everything out. And at this stage, it's just tweaking all the forms that we have, adding the resolution we need to wherever we want it. Like I mentioned, not a lot will change in terms of the shape of her. That's pretty much been decided on. Now it's just going in, figuring out which parts need to be simplified, like the ear here. We're just creating some planes and just creating some rough secondary shapes to pull back some of the realism a little bit.
So satisfying to watch this. Doesn't add anything to the sculpt per se, but just seeing those wireframes get dense.
Yeah, and there you can very clearly see the difference in resolution, right? We don't really need that resolution on the brow area because it's just a very soft shape, but we do need it to separate the lids from the brows, and especially making that plane, that sort of that lip of the eyelids, if you will. And we're also about to start the retopology process. Now, this is something you'll hear Henning and I talk about a lot on this channel, how you should never do retopology in ZBrush because it's absolute garbage. Now, it was brought to my attention that there was a way to do some retopology in ZBrush. So I thought I'd give it a try for this tutorial, where basically you're doing a combination of poly painting combined with MartinsPRO. So right now this brush is set to dynamic. It's adding resolution to the mesh at the same time as it's painting with black. This is to create contours for where we want our poly groups to be. And that'll all make a lot more sense once we actually start to create the poly groups. Now this is a very specific, very picky way of creating retopology, because any change will drastically change the outcome of your topology. But basically, we draw all that up, we poly group it from poly paint that creates those poly groups, and then the MartinsPRO allowed us to create resolution in between the poly groups. We go in with polish by feature or groups, either of them work, to straighten out the lines in between the different poly groups. Then you can crease those poly groups to have edges on either side. You remesh that with keep groups and everything enabled, and that then allows you to create this seemingly good topology for your mesh. There's this secondary stage that I've done where I go in, mask out some parts that are completely jumbled, and polish by groups and polish by feature again. And then I'll go in and I'll actually remesh it again at a lower resolution this time, after all the shapes have been cleaned up, to achieve a somewhat usable topology, I would say. Now, I would never recommend anyone do this. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of work to figure out how it actually works, you know, in order to get something that is usable. You'll never have production quality topology. It just doesn't work that way. There's too many things that can go wrong. I spent many days figuring out the optimal way to draw shapes and the optimal settings for this particular face, and it's just not worth it. It's definitely an interesting experiment, and I think you can use it for some things. Maybe there's some hard surface things you can use it for, or if you just want something quick and dirty, you could experiment with this for a little bit and get really good at it, and then start to utilize that for your sculpt. But in reality, just hitting remesh is probably going to be the better option for most people.
Yeah, look, retopology just isn't that hard. It's not that hard and doesn't take that much time. And what you can do to even eliminate that can be to use something like C-Wrap or Wrap 3, so it's basically the same thing, and use a pre-made base mesh for that.
Yeah, and before I used to sort of think about, well, what if you don't have access to other 3D software? Well, Blender's at a stage now where, you know, it's always been free, but it's decent at retopology. It's way better than...
It's okay.
It's okay. It's better than ZBrush, but that doesn't, you know, mean a lot. But at least there is access to free software that lets you retopologize. And if you want to do retopology, if you want to create clean meshes, especially if you're doing stylized work, get into the habit of doing proper retopology outside of ZBrush. I mean, you could do manual retopology in ZBrush as well, with C-spheres and all that kind of jazz, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, get Topogun or do it in, I think my preferred method is doing it with Quad Draw in Maya.
Yeah.
But don't do what we're showing you right now.
This is the sort of secondary phase of the retopology. After we're done with all the crazy steps, what you want to do, if you really want to pursue this, right, is you have to tweak the topology. So I'm going in and manually deleting stars, or if there's any kind of crazy directional change that I don't want, I'll go in, delete that, and remake it. However, CModeler is just god-awful when it comes to this kind of work, because you can't extract edges correctly, and you can't have more than 4 sides in your polygon, then it becomes a try. So it makes it kind of hard to work with. Another part is also reducing topology where you don't need it. Like you're seeing here, there's a lot of added stuff that you would never add by hand, but that, ZRemesher has to try and add something to have consistent flow everywhere. So it does take some time. You could probably get pretty fast at this kind of workflow and get something decent. But again, if you're looking to actually get good and do proper retopology, that needs to be done outside of ZBrush.
Yeah, this doesn't really solve a problem for me.
No, exactly. It's like a showcase more than anything else, I would say.
It looks really cool in this video. If you hadn't told me how much of a pain in the ass this was, I would have been like, damn, this was pretty cool. But then it's like, it took like 4 days to do it.
Yeah, it was 4 days of just experimenting. In the evenings I would experiment with different kinds of resolutions, different kinds of paths, especially when creating the polygroups in the beginning. That can make it pretty tricky to do, I think.
So we were debating whether we should show this at all, since we are basically raging about it. But I still think it's worth to have it in here just as a discussion for how you can effectively do topology and how you can not effectively do topology.
Yeah. And if you want to get more in depth about it, Francis-Xavier Martins on ArtStation, he was actually the guy that I sort of picked this up from. He has a tutorial on it, like a full tutorial on how to do everything. And we'll link that down below so you can check it out. I think he also has a tool to optimize it in ZBrush. So it's definitely worth checking out if you're interested. However, I would not recommend that path because it's a path of pain. And now that we have our retopology, it's like all the standard stuff. You take your retopologized version and your sculpt, you reproject it, and then you go in, because now you have clean topology. That's really a thing with clean topology when you're doing stylized stuff. It's so much easier to get the shapes exactly how you want, because you can accentuate just on the edges that go along your flow. It's not like going across edges, which sometimes happens. Especially when you're dynameshing, it can be kind of rough. But even with ZRemesh, straight up ZRemesh, you'll have weird topological flow that makes sculpting look kind of odd sometimes. It's again trying to figure out how to strike that balance between something very stylized and also realistic at the same time. Figuring out how much detail should you actually add in.
And then more topology in ZBrush.
Now here's another thing I wouldn't recommend you do. So obviously I wanted to clean up the brows and the lashes because they're kind of soft. You could totally do that with pure sculpting if your mesh was high res enough and you had enough time. But just good old, box modeling, just get it in there. Again, this is probably something I would choose to do in a real 3D package. You do this in Maya or Blender, it takes like 5 minutes. This probably takes 20 in ZBrush, just because it's CModeler and the way navigation works and transformation with gizmos in ZBrush just makes it horribly unintuitive and not worth your time. But, I thought we wanted to stick to ZBrush 100% for this tutorial to show you how it could be done. So maybe you could pick up a few tricks. One thing I definitely learned from doing the brows and the lashes like this was that you can mask individual vertices or edges if you mask around an edge. And then you can just, invert the mask, use your transform tools to just move that part. So if you do want to stick to ZBrush, and this is what the way you've chosen, the way of pain, I guess. This is definitely achievable, because I've, as you can see, we've done it, but it's not what I would recommend that you do, especially not if you want to be efficient about it.
Sounds a little bit like you have just left like the cult of ZBrush cowboys or something.
It's a cult I've never actually been in, but we just make fun of them so much.
You do get clean geometry from this though.
Yeah, which is really nice.
Like it works, it's just not effective.
No, like dragging these things out, and especially also here in the edit, we've tried to spare you from a lot of the pain. It's not very intuitive to move these things around and get them correctly positioned. Not as intuitive as it is in something like Maya, Max, or Blender, or whatever, a real 3D package.
Yeah, I mean it's just they're just different tools. For poly modeling, ZBrush just isn't very good.
No.
Same as if you wouldn't sculpt in Maya.
It's like people back in the day, but when they added C-Modeler, people were like losing their shit. They were like, oh my god, this is the end of modeling as we know it. And it's not. It really isn't. I know improvements have been done to C-Modeler now in ZBrush 2021, but still, it's not going to replace poly modeling. No.
I use it when I have to add additional loops to it, or maybe have to extrude something here and there, and I really just don't want to go out. But I don't use it as a serious modeling tool whatsoever.
It's great for adding a loop here and there, definitely. It's nice having that ability now, because before you had to export it out of ZBrush. Here we're making a bike helmet.
That's it.
That's it, we're done. No, so this is going to be the base for her hair. Now, the hair is being done in sort of two stages. One is adding a general shape for hair. So that's going to be this helmet type structure with a little bit of texture, but not a lot, because this isn't like the most important part of the hair. We'll add the sort of bangs to the front as well. We'll do that based on the mesh where we extract it. And then we're actually going to be jumping in and using one of Danny Mac's hair brushes. There's, I just like that was one of the brushes I picked up. I think it's a couple bucks on Gumroad or something like that. You can make those hair brushes yourself. There's nothing revolutionary in them. I was just too lazy to make my own, so that's why I picked it up. But yeah, you just start out with simple shapes like this. Obviously, I've also gone for a hairstyle that's not super advanced. Henning can attest to the pains of sculpting fur and hair.
Yeah, because keep it simple, guys.
For some reason, he does that a lot, even though he really doesn't enjoy it.
I don't know why I do that. It's like, why did you do Retopology in ZBrush? Sometimes you just gotta.
So again, I use the clay buildup just to add the rough details, and then I actually go in and destroy it with the smooth brush, Damien Standard, just to get a little bit of structure. And I'll actually go over it with the trim dynamic brush to remove most of my details, just so I have the slight peaks and valleys in here. I think it was also just me fighting against the whole idea of actually doing hair. I was like, should I just sculpt it? I'm like, no, it'll be better this way. So here we're adding an ice cream shape to her face. Or maybe it's like a little Hitler bang or something.
Oh, yeah.
But again, this is just to get the rough shape in place. So on these lines, the indication of hair is also to help me once we actually start using the hair brushes, just to give you some direction. Again, we'll go in with trim dynamic and just nuke all this detail, but it's just to get a rough idea.
Yeah, it's always easier to add details and then remove them.
Yeah. We'll just duplicate that because the next shape is kind of similar, so there's no reason to remake it from scratch, don't be afraid to just reuse stuff. Also, if you have something from a previous project, I didn't want to do that for this because I wanted you guys to actually hopefully learn something from it. But if you're doing something like a personal piece, or especially something for clients, reuse whatever you have in your library. If you've done something in the past, definitely reuse it. It doesn't have to be unique. There's no pride in it to like make everything unique and bespoke for the project you're doing. In the end, you just really care about getting a cool looking result. And obviously the more beginner you are, you obviously also care about learning, right? So you have to strike a balance between reuse and making something new from scratch.
Yeah, if this was client work, I would have Googled anime girl 3D model.
Yeah,
I would
exactly.
have modified that, and I would have used generic base mesh, and I would have used C-Wrap to conform it to it. Then it's whatever gets you the results fastest.
And if you think Henning and I sound a little sleepy, it's because there's currently a heat wave, and we're just sitting here sweating while we're looking at, well, past me sculpting hair.
Watching anime girls while we're being scorched.
So I really hope you're, learning something from this.
If not, all this zero meshing and heat pain has been for nothing.
I'd be curious to hear you guys' comments on other types of sculpts, what you would like to see, especially if you like this format as well, what you're actually more into, if you're more into more quick time-lapse stuff, if you want more narration, leave your thoughts down below, and we'll definitely try to be as accommodating as we can. Yeah, and here you see me just taking away all the detail. I mean, luckily this is like 5 or 10 minutes worth of work, just adding these things in there. It's, again, just to get the rough shape, just so we have something to go by. And then we jump into the hairbrush. So it's not a hairbrush the way that I think a lot of people think about it. It's not, you don't drag out hair on your mesh. It's actually adding geometry on top with these brushes. And I tend to stick to dynamic here to make it consistent, so that the size of it is fairly consistent, no matter what my zoom level is in ZBrush. Just tweaking the stroke curve a little bit here because we don't want to taper. You can always go in and experiment that, especially if you make your own brush as well, seeing what kind of taper you want in your hair. But here we would just want some straight shapes that go up and down into the ponytail. And another trick when you're working with these kinds of brushes is that you have that little curve on your mesh. If you're making changes, say to the brush size, if you want to have a thicker strand of hair, you don't need to recreate the strand. You simply just change your brush size while you're not hovering over the hair or over the curve, and then you click the curve again and it resizes the hair.
Like magic. A nice little fundamental for you when it comes to doing hair is you can do hair in layers. It's not just like you have one strand and that's it. You can have multiple layers of hair.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like about Danny's hairbrushes, is that it's a collection of 5 or 6 strands within one, and that allows you to both change the layering horizontally but also vertically, right? You can pull it up or down, hide some of it in the other parts of the hair, have like stray pieces of hair fly out a little bit, just to create some more, I guess, a more exciting silhouette, especially when it comes to hair.
I'm guessing you're using Move Topological for this.
Yeah. The nice thing with this hairbrush in particular is that every piece is actually separate geometry. So using the Move Topological brush just allows you to only target one specific strand. Right here where we're using the Move brush, you target everything. Another way to do it is also you could auto groups all the polygroups and then turn on masking by polygroups. That way, when you use the regular move brush, whatever polygroup it picks first, that's the one it'll be moving. It's essentially the same thing, but I just find it easier to use the Move Topological brush. So nothing really, I guess, mind-bending or super innovative in this process. I've done this a few times now, so I've sort of worked out a way that I think is kind of fast and works well for me. I lay out the basic strands first, so I kind of get an idea of the volume that I want to create, and then I just go into each one of them and tweak it a little bit with the Move Topological. Another thing that's nice is if you turn on dynamic subdivision. Dynamic subdivision can be on while you're moving things, so I get a more accurate representation of what the hair actually looks like. Then, like Henning mentioned with the layering, it can be nice to go in and add different size strands to your hair, so not everything is the same size and not everything is, made in exactly the same way. Here we just chose a different kind of hairbrush and also lowered the size of the brush. This just allows us to make some more stray hairs and let them poke out a little bit, kind of break up the sort of linear way that the hair is bundled up towards the ponytail.
Also, do hair with asymmetry. You really, really don't want asymmetrical hair unless you're going for extremely specific art style where that's needed.
Yeah, symmetry is like, it's both your best friend and your worst enemy when you're doing characters. It helps you speed up the entire process, but until a certain point. And if you don't get away from that, your character just ends up looking weird. And here we have some 70s inspired bangs. This is obviously because one of the main references is always also Zero Suit Samus. And, that's the kind of hairstyle that she sort of has. I was sort of referencing the figurine for this part, and I thought that'd be cool to add that.
And you're noticing here the Mortens using the referencing a lot, and that's because we're actually using reference when working for a lot of things. Even though this is fairly stylized, you'd still use references for this. Stylized does not mean not good.
No, and it doesn't mean easy or anything.
No, stylized is not easy. Far from it.
And then once you start layering all these clumps together, you start to actually get something that resembles hair. And this was maybe, up until this point, like maybe 20 minutes of just quickly throwing in the hair there, just so we have some shapes. And that allows us to have something that we can then tweak. So you can obviously spend way more time on it and make it a lot nicer, but I thought this was enough to sort of get the point across. Again, we're just making this is a sausage shape this time, so we've done bike helmet, ice cream, and now a sausage.
All the three components of hair, as we all know.
I'm trying to sort of distribute the weight a little bit on this ponytail, so it's kind of fat at the bottom and sort of droops down a little bit, just to give it a nice heavy feel to it. And it's also important that you don't make it too, your sausage shape too big, because you're adding the hair volume on top, unless if you want really, really thick hair. But just keep in mind that this actually changes what it looks like. And a quick tip, if you're sort of moving the tips, the ends of your hair, it doesn't matter if it's hair or whatever it is. If you're moving something like this and you're using the regular move brush, you've probably experienced that it moves it not in an intuitive way when you're moving it. But if you go under brush, you can actually turn on AccuCurve. AccuCurve just changes the way sort of moving interpolates, I guess, and it makes it a lot easier to move tips and ends of meshes.
I didn't know that one. Thank you.
It's pretty cool. Thanks, Danny.
Thanks, Danny.
Yeah, so again, just emphasizing the bottom of the ponytail here, just to make it a little bit thicker.
When it comes to grooming as well, whether you're doing proper grooms with actual hair or you're doing more stylized, you really want to think about your clumps. Here you can see it's very stylized because there are really big clumps.
Yeah.
But you really want to make sure that you're thinking about clumping. It's one of the key things you want to do whenever you're doing anything when it comes to hair.
Another thing when you're using curves like this is that if you're making a strand of hair, for example, and you decide to make another one and the brush size is too large so it interacts with the other curve, it'll actually do it based on the existing curve. But if you just tap anywhere on your mesh before you create the second curve, the first curve is just deleted and it's like it never existed in the first place. That makes it a lot easier to work with these kind of curve brushes. There you go, you just saw me turn on AccuCurve, and again that just makes it a lot easier to tweak the ends of the hair here. And there we go. Just added a little bit of last piece of hair just to integrate it a little better. And there we have a Overwatch inspired Zero Suit Samus face complete with hair. As you can see, there's a body below, which I'm not showing you, but that's, I guess, for another time maybe. This is part of a bigger project, but we really wanted to share a more in-depth, long-form tutorial with you where we actually show you start to finish how to create something like this. So I really hope you enjoyed it and you learned something. If you have any questions about it, make sure to leave a comment down below. And if you want to see more like this in the future, if you have suggestions for what you want to see, also be sure to jump down there and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future videos.